Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Pesachim. We're up to Perek Bet, Mishna Daled. Today's Mishnah should be Leilun Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Ranbayev, Eliyahu ben Burchai, Israelov, Menuchatam Began Eden. Amen. We know Terumah is one of the portions that must be separated from produce that grew in Eretz Israel. It must be given to a Kohen. Terumah is sacred and may be eaten only by Kohanim and the members of their households. The Torah forbids a non-Kohen to eat Terumah, and furthermore, one who ate the Terumah of a Kohen is guilty of stealing and must pay the owner. Now, the form of payment depends on whether he knew that he was committing the sin of eating Terumah. If he sinned knowingly, meaning he knew that the food was Terumah and that eating Terumah is forbidden, he simply pays the Kohen the value of what he stole, just like an ordinary thief. But if he sinned mistakenly, he must replace the Terumah, meaning he must designate an equivalent amount of the same kind of produce, plus a fifth, we will explain, as Terumah, and give it to the Kohen. Now, in actuality, he adds a quarter of the principle. The Torah in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 22, pasuk 14, calls it a fifth because it is a fifth of the final payment, which is the principle with the quarter. By paying this extra amount, he gains atonement for his sin. The Mishnah discusses the law of a non-Kohen who on Pesach ate chametz, that is Terumah. Ha'ochel terumat chametz b'Pesach b'shogeg. If one ate terumah of chametz on Pesach mistakenly, meaning he did not know that he was violating the prohibition of eating terumah, the Rav explains it makes no difference whether he knew that he was violating the prohibition of eating chametz on Pesach. It only makes a difference of if he knew that he was violating the prohibition of eating terumah. The Mishnah says, Mishalem keren v'chomesh. He must pay the principal plus the 1/5. Now, although chametz is not worth anything on Pesach, since having benefit from chametz is forbidden, he must still pay the Kohen, because one who ate terumah mistakenly does not pay the value of what he ate, but the amount of what he ate. Bimezid, however, if he sinned knowingly, meaning he knew that he was violating the prohibition of eating terumah, patur mitashrumim, he is exempt from making payment of any kind, because one who ate terumah knowingly must pay the value of what he ate, and chametz on Pesach is not worth anything. Umidmei, it seems the commentators explain, he is exempt even from paying the value of the terumah as firewood, meaning to say if the terumah was tameh, which can normally be used as firewood, he does not need to pay even if it's even the firewood value, even its firewood value, because the Kohen could not have used it for that purpose in any event on Pesach, when benefiting from chametz is forbidden. Now the commentators give us the background. Terumah that is tameh must be burned. When a Kohen burns such terumah, he's allowed to have benefit from it, for example, by using it as fuel for cooking. Now the Mishnah clearly refers to terumah that is tameh, because regular terumah must be eaten and may never be burned. And even in that case, if a person, chas v'shalom, violated the law and stole b'mezid, he knew that he was violating the prohibition of eating the terumah, right? Still, nevertheless, he's exempt from making the payment and even from paying the value of the terumah as firewood. And that is the end of Mishnah Daled. Mishnah now discusses the mitzvah of eating matzah on the first night of Pesach, meaning the Seder night. We know the Rav explains it is a biblical obligation to eat matzah on the first night of Pesach, as the pasuk says in Sefer Shemot, chapter 12, pasuk 18. Now, during the rest of Pesach, there is no obligation to eat matzah. One is merely required to refrain from eating chametz. Now, only matzah made from certain types of grain is fit for the mitzvah. And the Mishnah begins, Elu dvarim she'adam yotzeh b'hen yedei chovato b'Pesach. These are the species with which a person fulfills his obligation on Pesach, meaning one fulfills his obligation only by eating matzah that was baked with flour of the following grains: bachitim, wheat; baseorim, barley; bakusimin, spelt; uvashifon, rye; uvshibolet, shual, and oats. And the Rav explains that we learn from verses in the Torah that matzah must be made of grains that can become chametz, and not from grains that can never become chametz. And this excludes grains such as rice or millet, which if left to rise will spoil rather than become chametz. Right, as the Rav quotes to us, Dichtiv, the pasuk says in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 16, Pasuk 3, Lo tochal alav chametz, shivat yemim tochal alav matzot. You must eat matzot for the 7 days. Dvarim haba'im lidei chimutz adam yotzeh ben lidei chovat matzah. Only species that have left will rise. A person has to use those species to fulfill his obligation of matzah. Yatsu orez v'dochan. This excludes rice and millet. Ushar minim and other species. She'en ba'im lidei chimutz, that they don't rise if left to rise. Rather, like we said, they will spoil. Those are not fit for the mitzvah of matzah. Furthermore, the obligation can be fulfilled only with matzah that is permitted to be eaten, and not with that which is forbidden. Now, this too is learned from the Torah. If a piece of matzah is prohibited for consumption, one who eats it not only violates the prohibition in question, but also fails to fulfill the obligation of eating matzah. And in addition, the mitzvah is invalid because it's a mitzvah haba ba'avera, mitzvah that came about to a transgression, which generally is invalid. And the Mishnah continues, v'yotzin b'demai. One can fulfill his obligation with demai, because demai may be eaten by the poor. Now, demai is produce obtained from an unlearned person in Amaretz. Now, it's possible that such produce is tevel. Tevel is produce from which one of the required portions has not been separated. Now, it's possible because some Amaretz did not separate maaser. So to prevent people from eating tevel, which is a biblical transgression, the rabbis decreed that one must remove maaser from demai before eating it. Now, under biblical law, demai is permitted because most Amaretz do separate maaser from their produce. The rabbis made an exception, even though generally they prohibited it without removing the maaser. They made an exception in the case of poor people and allowed them to eat demai without first removing maaser from it, like we learned earlier in Mishnah Masechet Demai, chapter 3, Mishnah 1. Now, although a person cannot fulfill his obligation to eat matzah with forbidden food, one who ate matzah demai has fulfilled his obligation, even if he did not remove maaser from it. Since demai is permitted to poor people, and any person can become poor immediately by giving up ownership of all of his property, matzah demai is not considered to be completely prohibited, and one can therefore fulfill his obligation with it, even if he does not surrender ownership of his property, as the Gemara writes on page 35b in Masechet Pesachim. And the Mishnah continues, Uv maaser rishon shenitla terumato. One can fulfill his obligation with maaser rishon whose terumat maaser has been separated, which may be eaten by anyone. And the commentators explain several portions must be separated from produce that grew in Eretz Yisrael. The first is terumah. After separating terumah, one must separate 1/10 of what remains, maaser rishon, we call it the first tithe, and give it to a Levi. However, even the Levi may not eat maaser rishon until he separates 1/10 of it, terumat maaser, which he must give to a Kohen. Before the terumat maaser has been separated, maaser rishon is tevel and may not be eaten by anyone. But after the separation of terumat maaser, maaser rishon is permitted. So the Mishnah says you can use maaser rishon whose terumat maaser has been separated to fulfill your obligation of eating matzah. With maaser sheni ve'ekdesh shenivdu, and with maaser sheni and consecrated food that have been redeemed, which may also be eaten by anyone. And the commentators explain, after separating terumah and maaser rishon from produce, one must separate another 1/10 from the remainder. Now, in most years, one is obligated to take this 1/10 called maaser sheni to Yerushalayim and eat it there, or redeem it with money, which one must then take to Yerushalayim and use to buy food that he eats there. As the Torah says in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 14, Pesukim 22 through 26. Now, this is the law in the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the 7-year Shemitah cycle. The second 1/10 that is separated in the third and sixth years must be given to the poor. We call maaser ani. Now, produce that was consecrated, donated to the temple treasury, is hekdesh, it's holy, and therefore it's prohibited for use until it's redeemed with money, which then assumes the status of the hekdesh. Once maaser sheni and consecrated produce have been redeemed with money, the produce loses its sanctity and may be eaten by any person in any place, and that's why you can fulfill your obligation of eating matzah with such produce. Va'kohanim b'chala u'b'terumah, and kohanim can fulfill their obligation with chala or terumah, both of which they are permitted to eat. Now, chala is a portion that must be separated from dough. It has all the laws of terumah. Now, a kohen can use chala or terumah to fulfill his obligation of eating matzah, since both are permitted to him. Leviim and Israelim, on the other hand, who are forbidden to eat these items, may not use them. Aval lo betevel. However, the Mishnah says it is not possible to fulfill the obligation with tevel, which is prohibited to everyone. Velo b'maaser rishon shelo nitna trumato, nor with maaser rishon whose terumat was not separated, which is also prohibited to everyone. Velo b'maaser sheni ve'ekdeshon nivdu, nor with maaser sheni outside Yerushalayim or consecrated property that has not been redeemed, because maaser sheni is prohibited outside Yerushalayim and consecrated items are prohibited everywhere. Now the Mishnah discusses two more types of matzah. Chalot todah, regarding the matzah loaves of a todah offering. A todah offering is accompanied by 4 sets of 10 loaves, each set prepared in a different manner. 3 of these sets are forms of matzah. Ulkike nazir, and the matzah wafers of the offering brought by a nazir. A nazir, we know, is one who took a special vow that prohibits him from cutting his hair, drinking wine, or eating any part of a grape, and becoming impure from a corpse. When the term of his vow ends, he's required to bring several offerings, including 20 matzot, as the Torah says in Sefer Bamidbar, chapter 6, pasuk 15. Asa'an la'atzmo, the Mishnah says, if one made them for himself to bring with his offering and then changed his mind, deciding that he wants to use them instead for the mitzvah of eating matzah and Pesach, and yotzin bahen, he may not fulfill his obligation with them because they were not protected from being chametz for the sake of a mitzvah. Since he baked the matzot intending them to be part of his offering, he cannot use them for the mitzvah of matzah instead, because the Torah states regarding the matzah obligation in Sefer Shemot, chapter 12, pasuk 17, Ushmartem et matzot, and you shall safeguard the matzot, which we learn from becoming chametz. And the rabbis interpret this as teaching that we must safeguard the matzah from becoming chametz for the purpose of the mitzvah and not for a different purpose. Asa'an imkor bashuk, but if one made them to sell in the marketplace to whoever needs them for an offering, and then to keep the unsold ones for the mitzvah of matzah, yotzin bahen, he must fulfill his obligation with them because they were protected for the sake of the mitzvah. And the Rav explains, when one bakes matzot to sell to people who need them for todah or nazir offerings, he presumably intends that if he does not sell all of them, he will use the unsold ones for the mitzvah of eating matzah. And this intent suffices for the unsold matzot to be viewed as having been baked for the mitzvah, and therefore they would be permitted for use for the sake of the mitzvah and the Leila Seder. That is the end, Rabotai, of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.